Okay, there is no question that Donald Trump's events have often been interrupted by protesters. There's a lot of passion at them, but in the last week, it does seem to have been elevated in these large-scale rallies. There does seem to be violence more often than not. The scale, the situation, the impact, those are all debatable. But what about the responsibility and how much of it is on Donald Trump to calm the temperature at his own rallies? Let's discuss. CNN political commentator and professor at Morehouse College, Mark Lamont Hill, and CNN law enforcement analyst, former FBI special agent, Jonathan Gilliam. Gentlemen, thank you for being here. Professor, make the case. What do you see going on at these rallies, and who do you think is responsible?
Well, what I see is democracy in action, right, which is what both sides are arguing. You have the opportunity in America to come and protest and to say whatever you want within certain limits and boundaries and with certain penalties. So I see people resisting Donald Trump's message. I see people protesting Donald Trump's message. But what I see now is a kind of violent response from Trump supporters that is egged on by Donald Trump. I'm not making a legal argument that Donald Trump should be held legally liable. What I am saying, though, is that there's an ethical demand, an ethical standard on any decent human being to not tell people to punch people in the face, to not suggest that you'll pay people's legal bills if they get arrested for punching someone in the face. I mean, it just seems like a pretty basic rule of human decency.
The pushback is, what if they're not just there as protesters, they're plants to disrupt, to infringe on Donald Trump's ability to get out his message, to start fights with his protesters, to make Trump and his supporters look bad?
That's a fair point. I've been doing activism for 20 years. I've been on the ground as a resistor to these things for 20 years. And every political movement, every political candidate has plants from the other party there to make them look bad. The difference is the candidate historically has not said punch people in the face. Because even if people are there to cause problems, telling your supporters to punch them in the face only makes things worse. The goal of a politician should be to de-escalate these situations, not escalate them.
Chicago was the ugliest we've seen so far. Officers, at least one got hurt there, turned into a near riot situation, had to cancel the event. How do you see it?
Well, I understand what Mark is saying about our right to speak over somebody and right to free speech. But when we have a right to assemble, especially inside a private place, and actually meet up and discuss peacefully what we're trying to discuss, to have people come in an organized fashion with the intent of disrupting, causing intimidation, and potentially inciting violence. Now what we're starting to see is far beyond one individual or one candidate saying something in particular, and more upon, we're putting the emphasis, or should be putting the emphasis, more upon this group or groups of people that are coming in to do this. Because what we're doing now, both sides are skating the ethical line. There's no doubt about that. And legally, it's going to be very difficult to prosecute anybody. There's no record really of a lot of people being prosecuted for this. But the powder keg that is being built right now, that is the thing that we all have to start looking at. Because as we were talking before we came on camera, this is something that could turn completely violent and blood could be shed. And that is where, because both of these groups are very charged, that's where we're going to start to see things change.
If you were a security advisor to Donald Trump, to his team, would you tell him to calm it down? When these things are going on in the crowd, don't egg it on. Forget about your legal responsibilities, but would that be your advice?
Well, this is a very difficult question, because Donald Trump is running on the platform of standing up to these protesters and standing up to the status quo politically. So I would definitely say those particular words of punch somebody in the face and getting involved in saying that I'm going to pay somebody's legal bills, you're setting yourself up for maybe not being prosecuted, but definitely a lot of heartache. On the other hand, I would definitely start to look at these different groups and the organizers of these groups, because everything's changed. Everything they do when they go online to organize these things, and they always do, now you have a trail. And not that we would ever prosecute anyone under a RICO status or something similar to that. If we start to show large groups of people organizing for the sheer purpose of inciting violence, of rioting, and causing fear and intimidation, we're not just looking at protesting. Now we're looking at something that is organized and really does go against the civil rights that we have.
The private venue, Professor, is what makes it a little bit more complicated for your side of the analysis here, is that when he actually buys a venue to hold an event, in terms of what's allowed to go on in there, it changes in terms of the favor of the event.
Well, to some extent, let's not forget these are public figures who are having public events so that the public will vote for them. So if we start to privatize the critique here, that leads us down a dangerous path. Another thing that I want to make sure we don't do since we're on national TV is pose a hypothetical that's also counterfactual. These people aren't organizing for the purpose of violence or inciting violence. There's no evidence of that. I've been around these movements, again, for decades, and when you look closely at them, even right now at this current moment in history, they're not organizing to incite violence. There's no organizing to cause problems or intimidation or harm. They're protesting what they consider to be an aggressive and violent rhetoric. We saw these same protesters come to Hillary in Atlanta. I saw them to Bernie Sanders in Seattle. I've seen them all over the country. And the only difference between what happened there and what's happened here is that Hillary and Bernie haven't said, hey, punch him in the face. And somehow it seems to me you get a better result when you don't tell people to punch people in the face, which I'm glad we both agreed on.
Final word, John.
Well, I think you have to look at the actions of both groups, and you have to look at the actions and the reasons that both groups are there. And I just think right now, especially in the media, we have to be very careful, and we have to set ethical standards and follow those ethical standards, because we're all a match that could easily set this powder keg off. And I guess the last thing I'll say is that during these things in Chicago, I saw a tweet where a woman said that if I was just watching the big three networks, I wouldn't know what's going on. I think it's very important that the media takes the lead and tamping down the pressure that's going on here, regardless of what people are saying.
Understood. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Appreciate both sides of the analysis, as always.
You got it.
Mick?